This week, writer Mike Barron, creator of Nexus and Badger, talks about his latest comic called Florida Man, crowdfunding, and about his approach to writing. Also, writer Jason McNamara is back with a newly kickstarted comic with Greg Hinkle called Nocturnal Commissions. He talks about that, his approach to crowdfunding, and how the pandemic might affect fiction writing. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Jason McNamara is coming up, but first my talk with writer Mike Barron, making his second appearance on the podcast. So, Mike Barron, welcome back to Deconstructing Comics.
Thank you.
So how's the pandemic been treating you?
Well, here in Fort Collins, Colorado, the rate of infection is pretty low, and the rate of death is pretty low. But for those of us who are freelance writers, we're used to staying home and working for long hours and not mixing with people. When we do get out, it's usually outdoor activities. We go to a nearby health club that has a pool, or I ride my bicycle.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. I was at home for a couple of months, and I was like, what's different about this? I'm just working on podcasts and teaching on Skype.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but much of the world has been kind of crazy this year. As a writer, do you wonder how you can top what the real world is giving us, or does it actually inspire story ideas?
It does. I think I can improve on it. In fact, I'm working on a novel right now.
Okay, cool. And you mentioned last time I talked to you that you like grim stories. So we've had a pretty grim story here this year.
But I like to be entertained too. I mean, it can't just be a litany of ugliness. There's got to be a narrative with hopefully a happy ending. Mm-hmm. For example, those two Equalizer movies starring Denzel Washington, they're among my favorite movies.
Okay. Now, when we talked a couple years ago, you said you were looking to crowdfund some work, and as we speak, you've got a project running very successfully on Indiegogo. So tell us about that. Oh, you're holding up a Nexus. Is that the Nexus novel?
That's it. That's the Nexus novel. I just got them today.
Okay, great.
We crowdfunded that.
Okay. But why did you decide to do a novel rather than a comic this time?
I felt that the newspaper strip that Steve was doing off of my scripts didn't truly reflect the depth of the story. He changed most of my lines. That's his prerogative. He was the publisher at the time, and he paid me. And Dude has his idea of how Nexus should proceed, and I have mine. And we still remain very good friends. In fact, we spoke today, but we are pursuing our separate Nexus visions.
I see. Okay. So you've got that out, and then you've got another project running right now, Florida Man?
The Florida Man graphic novel.
And what's that about?
You must have some clue. I mean, you've seen the Florida Man stories, right?
Yeah, I got the gist of it, but...
All right. Here's a couple of my favorites. Florida Man claims syringe found in rectum is not his. Florida Man leads police on 3.5-hour chase through Walmart ceiling. But by the time I saw my 30th Florida Man story, it just lit a fire in me. I said, what if you were to take all these stories and aggregate them in one human being, an archetypal Florida Man? And I went from there. I started working it up, what this guy's like. His name is Gary Duba. He lives in a trailer down by the swamp.
Of course he does.
He's a decent guy. He's a good-hearted guy, but he's got a hair-trigger temper, and he makes bad decisions. He works as a roofer, and he's always looking to get ahead. He's always looking for the next get-rich-quick scheme. And the latest, when the story begins, is his house suspenders, which are these giant chains that go over the roof of the house and anchor to the ground. in the event of a hurricane or something, which you'd think would be a big seller in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he lives with his girl, Crystal. And it starts when he and his best friend Floyd are drunk on the deck one night. He goes in to take a leak, and there's a snake in his toilet. So he comes out to take a leak off the end of the deck. It has no rail there, and he slips and knocks himself out. And then when he wakes up in the morning, he finds a cell phone he lost, and he finds a message from Crystal that says, "Gary, baby, I'm in jail. It stinks here. I'm in jail. I got naked at a Waffle Hut, and I licked the manager. You got to come get me out. Bail is $500. So he and Floyd set off to sell his prized Barry Bonds rookie card to raise the money. But it's just one thing after another. On the way to the pawn shop, they get into a shooting incident with a woman in a Lincoln Continental next to them on the highway. You know, they've got their guns out the window, and she's shooting at them, and they're shooting at her. And then they split off and go to the pawn shop. And well, it turns out that woman's a state judge, and they meet up later. And that's part of the story. I can't really tell you everything that goes on in the book because I want it to be a surprise. And believe me, it will be. If you've ever read a comic that promised humor in the past and you didn't smile once, this ain't that book. I guarantee you will burst out laughing multiple times. Your head will explode and your eyes will pop out of your skull.
Okay, well, I would hope that wouldn't go that far, but...
Well, I mean, figuratively speaking, it would be a good Florida Man story. But you'll see when you read it, the way it's constructed. It's not jokes or puns. It's real gut-busting humor that arises out of the situations. A lot of it has to do with animals. Florida is overrun with invasive species, one of which is the Burmese python. People brought these in for pets. I don't know what kind of person keeps a snake as a pet, but there are a lot of them apparently. And when they got too big, they just let them loose in the Everglades, and now they're a huge problem all over the state. So much so that once a year they have a week-long python call that the state sponsors with prizes for the biggest snakes.
Wow, I see. I'm trying to gather up some of them. Huh?
Yeah, but Gary has trouble with all sorts of animals. Feral hogs, rats, nutria, insects, the Mekong giant catfish.
Wow, okay. Now, I was interested that you chose to put your project on Indiegogo rather than Kickstarter. What was the reason for choosing Indiegogo?
I couldn't run a crowdfunder to save my life. My wife, Ann, ran the Nexus Kickstarter, and she did a brilliant job. But when Chris Brawley stepped up and offered to run this show for us, to run the fundraiser, I said, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad he did. I don't know if you've seen the trailer he put together, but it's a mind blower.
I looked at the page. I did not watch the video, but I guess I should have.
Yeah, it's only 30 seconds. Take a look at it when we're done. I guarantee you'll laugh.
Okay. Now, how many crowdfunding projects have you done so far?
3.
Okay. So this and the Nexus novel, and what was the other one?
Cue Ball. It's a martial arts espionage thriller. And I'm doing with a terrific artist in Denver named Barry McLean. Barry McLean is a monster. We have a Cue Ball page on Facebook. If you go there, you'll see a lot of the art. Every time he sits down to draw, it gets better. And we're talking to 3 publishers now. We crowdfunded the first book. We printed up maybe 1,000, you know. And Barry got half, and I got half, and I'm down to like the last 100. And that's it. You know, that's the only place you can get it, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be reprinted and distributed with our new publisher.
Okay. And for Florida Man, your artist is Todd Mulrooney. How did you get
Todd Mulrooney?
How did you get hooked up with him?
I contributed a story to a horror anthology, and I can't even remember what it was. It was never published successfully, but Todd was illustrating my story, and his art caught my eye. It's very exciting. Have you looked at his art?
Well, I saw it on your page, on the Indiegogo
and also
page.
on the Indiegogo page. I mean, it's just brilliant. He keeps getting better every time he sits down to draw. But his image of the cover with Gary riding the alligator over traffic like Slim Pickens in Dr. Strangelove, which was his inspiration. Everybody that sees that image is interested. They got to get the book. And when I was done, I was going to be a comic originally, and we had a guy interested in publishing it, but that didn't last. And I had these scripts, and when I looked at them, I said, well, this is a very detailed outline for a novel. So I wrote the novel, and I sent it to my publisher, and he snapped it up, and it was in print a month later. It's by far my most popular novel. It's on Amazon, Florida Man by Mike Barron. Now the sequel is out, too, Hogzilla by Mike Barron.
Okay, so there's a novel version of this out already, and then this is the comics version. Yeah,
but they're different stories. They overlap, but they're different, because every time I sit down to write, if I look at anything I wrote over the years, I'm proud of a lot of it, but if I have the means to change it, I'm always fiddling with it. I always see things I want to change, so I got to push it away when I'm done and move on to the next project. But when I sat down, I realized we were really going to do this Florida Man graphic novel. I reworked the first 24 pages, and then I kept going from there, and now it's expanded to a 64-page story.
Wow, okay.
But like everything I write, it's a dynamic narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you finish it, you're gonna feel satisfied. You're not gonna, you won't be disappointed like you often are with comics you get from the local comic shop or from the big two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Todd's work is really nice. Really good figure drawing, and looks really well composed also. Let's see. Oops,
I could talk about how I write.
All right, how do you write?
Well, I start with an idea. An idea can come from anywhere. And one thing that I would recommend to any creative person, be an artist or writer, is to carry a notepad with you at all times and a pen, and write down whatever enters your head, whatever constitutes an idea. Sometimes it's just a name. I'll hear a name that resonates, and I'll write it down, and I'll use it later in my fiction. And a good place for names is Judge Judy. She has the greatest names on that show. But when I write, I have 3 rules. The first rule is it's my job to entertain, and I keep that foremost. My goal, always, is to grab the reader by the throat and drag him into the narrative to the exclusion of all else. And number 2 is show, don't tell, which seems pretty simple, but it's not for a lot of people. Whether you're doing comics or straight prose, show, don't tell is not only a good principle for creating stories, it's a good principle for life as well. And the third rule is to be original, which I've never had a problem with. And I don't think any serious writer would have a problem because we're all unique human beings. And when you write a narrative or piece of fiction, it necessarily contains your worldview. And if you can explain it well, it doesn't matter what that worldview is, it's entertaining. I had a great teacher once. His name was Jerry McNeely. And he said, you make them laugh a little bit, you make them cry a little bit, you scare the hell out of them, and that's entertainment.
But I wanted to go back to your first point about grabbing the reader by the throat. How do you go about doing that?
There are many ways. You begin with a compelling scene, like so many comic books do, with a full-page splash of the hero slugging it out with a monster or something. That's easy to do in a comic, because comics are the most forgiving medium there are. You can get away with stuff in comics you can't in any other medium. But comics are as good as you make them. I mean, they can tell just as complicated and satisfying a story as a novel can. But I use every trick in the book to entice the reader into the story. It can be a compelling plot, like The Time Machine or War of the Worlds. It can be a compelling character, like Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes has been around for 150 years, and people cannot get enough of him still today. It also helps that he's in the public domain. It can be a compelling idea, such as Ringworld by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. Or it can be a seductive narrative voice. Just the flow of words entices. And a couple guys that do that, and they're complete opposites. Michael Chabon and James Ellroy. Now, Michael Chabon wrote The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and Chabon is one of those guys that knows every word in the world, and his vocabulary expresses it. If you want to expand your vocabulary, read Michael Chabon. He did a novel called Berkeley Avenue about a vinyl store, and there's one chapter in there about a parrot, and the chapter is about 5,000 words long, and it's one single sentence. And you never lose interest the whole way. Now, on the other hand, you have James Ellroy, who wrote L.A. Confidential, which is what most people are familiar with because it was made into a movie. And Ellroy learned to write from the tabloids of the 50s and 60s. If you can channel Walter Winchell chomping out his sentences, that's the way Ellroy writes. He writes like a machine gun. One short sentence after another. He loves alliteration too, but nobody can ape Ellroy. I mean, he's sui generis. You have to read his books to appreciate what he does. So that's the narrative voice. I have my own narrative voice. It's something I've worked up over the years, and it's just what I feel comfortable with. And it has a lot to do with show don't tell. And trying to deliver the maximum impact with the minimum number of words. And that doesn't mean the fiction is short. This Nexus novel is over 400 pages, but there's no padding, and there are no boring stretches because I don't allow myself to be bored, and I won't let the reader be bored.
If some people listening might not, I mean, show don't tell is a common piece of advice, but some people might not know detail. Could you give kind of an example what you mean of showing versus telling?
Sure. In principle, it means that if you're working in a visual medium like comics or television, if there's any bit of information that advances the story that you can transmit to your viewers visually without people speaking, you should do it. And if people want to know what do I mean by this, Better Call Saul is the best example I can think of. It's a TV show on AMC, I believe, and it's in its 4th or 5th season. You watch any episode of Better Call Saul, watch the beginning because it often begins with a wordless 5-minute sequence, and you wonder what you're looking at until you get to that sequence, and then you understand. They're just masterful at showing, not telling. And when it comes to straight prose, it means that, here's an example. John went into the alley and Bill shot him in the back. That's telling. But if you say John entered the alley and was immediately aware of the smell of rotting sewage and the dampness and the shadow, as ground glass crunched when he took a step, suddenly a bulldozer slammed him in the back into the red brick wall, and as he fell toward the floor of the alley, he felt the granules of red brick scraping off on his cheek. Finally, he lay on his back, unable to move, feeling a warm wetness pooling beneath the small of his back. And I suppose I could throw in something like there was a deafening explosion, but it's showing in words instead of telling.
Now, of course, in comics, we got pictures. Is it possible to do that badly so that you're just telling in a comic?
Every day.
So how would that work if you're doing a comic, you got pictures, but you're just telling?
All right, here's an example. There's a picture of Sir Isaac Newton sitting beneath the apple tree. An apple bounces off his skull. And the caption says, "An apple bounces off Sir Isaac Newton's skull." And Sir Isaac Newton says, "Oh, an apple just bounced off my skull." And I have a cover of a magazine called The Worm, which is very funny, which I'll send you later because it's another good example. Just this giant worm, and everybody's talking about the worm. And
yeah, well, actually, I can remember there was a particular episode, the old TV show That Girl. Yeah. I don't know what happened with that particular episode, but something must have gone wrong in the filming of it or something. Half of the action, especially in the last half, was just that girl, Marlo Thomas and her boyfriend talking about what happened, and you didn't actually ever see it. There was a character they introduced in the middle of the episode who sort of kind of vanished, and they just had to explain what happened to him without showing us. That was kind of a frustrating episode.
Maybe it was badly written.
Could be. I don't know. It was a weird one. The last time I talked to you, you mentioned, so you were talking about writing down names and that stuff that occur to you to use later. You said you had come up with a title that you hadn't been able to use, The Snot-Nosed Punk of Yore. Did you ever find a way to use that?
No. But
Okay.
I do. I think it might be a tale of young William Shakespeare, but I'm not sure.
Okay, interesting. Young William Shakespeare. Okay. So I was trying to look at your website, and it seems to have vanished, the bloodyredbaron.com site. What happened to that?
Really? I wasn't aware of that. I will get my tech person on that instanter. However, for those who want to keep up with me, they can follow me at Twitter as @BloodyRedBaron.
Okay, it's actually working now. I don't know what was wrong with it the other day, but yeah, sorry about that. It's still there, yes.
Oh, good.
bloodyredbaron.com. Okay.
But I do most of my talking through Facebook and Twitter. And on Facebook, I have an author page, Mike Barron.
Okay. Following up on a few other things from a couple years ago, I still don't see any Badger on Comixology. You said you were going to talk to your publisher about it. But,
I will make a note of that. Talk to Ken about...
Tons of Nexus, but no Badger. Now, of course, with the pandemic, Hollywood is pretty much ground to a halt. Are we any closer to a Nexus movie?
These things seem to bake forever, but keep your fingers crossed. We should have an announcement shortly.
So, you got any new projects in the works beyond what you're crowdfunding now?
I'm writing a new Nexus novel because the reaction to the first one was very gratifying. I'm sure they're going to be happy when they read it too. And this new one's really exciting. I'm working on my 8th Josh Pratt novel. And did I mention Cue Ball? We're talking to a publisher about Cue Ball. But that's actually all written. All Barry has to do is draw it. And there are a couple of other projects I'm not at liberty to mention. That they're in the negotiation phase, but it's looking good.
Okay. Yeah. I'm looking at your site here now. I had not been aware, or maybe I just forgot, that you in the past wrote some Star Wars stories.
Well, I had the pleasure of adopting Timothy Zahn's novels into comic prose.
Okay.
And I pride myself that I use none of my own language. Every word in there is Tim's. But they were easy to do because he's such a visual artist, a visual writer, I mean.
I see. Okay, that was an adaptation. When did that happen? When did you do that?
Oh, gosh. That was in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, but now Marvel took over the license, and they're reprinting those books.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm going to have to pick up that first Nexus novel. How can I go about getting it? What's the best way to buy it?
Send me $30. I'll send it to you postpaid.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, good to catch up with you again. Good luck with your future crowdfunding.
Thank you, Tim.
Mike Barron is at bloodyredbaron.com. That link and the link to his Florida Man campaign are in the show notes. Next up, Jason McNamara talking about his latest, as well as his thoughts on crowdfunding and story writing. All right, I'm talking to our old friend Jason McNamara. How you doing?
Greetings, Tim. Good evening. It's the middle of the night for me. So, what time is it where you are?
It's 5 p.m.
5 p.m. Okay, it's 1 a.m. here.
Yeah.
So we're probably meeting at the same baseline. I'm a night owl anyway, so this is good timing for both of us, I think. We should always get together at 1 a.m. my time.
Okay. So Jason's in Portland, right? Still in Portland.
Yes.
And I'd forgotten. So I went back and listened to the last time we met in person when I was in Portland 3 years ago. And I was thinking, oh, that's the last time I talked to him. But no, there was another time after that I'd forgotten about when you were on and we talked about
Page's book.
The anniversary of Jane's World.
Yeah. I've been on your show a lot. It's like this. It's like a family reunion.
Yeah, well, it looks to me like this is the 9th time you've been on.
Wow. I feel like Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live.
And 3 of those times in person. The time in San Francisco with Matt and other people in the restaurant. Right. The Writer's Old Fashioned. And then the other time I guess it was in Oakland with Deb Aoki and John.
At a restaurant.
I'd completely spaced that one off. That was 2014. And then the time in Portland 3 years later. So
I drink a lot. If you had asked me, I would have said 4 times. My memory is awful. So now that I know Portland a little better, I can honestly say that the hotel you were in is in a bad neighborhood. That's not a good neighborhood you were in. Run, Tim.
Well, I got out okay 3 years ago, so...
Yeah. Now when I drive past it, I think, man, poor Tim. I wish I could have steered him in a better direction.
Well, I was on a budget, and that wasn't the nicest motel anyway, but...
No, but we're just both glad that you didn't wake up in a bathtub missing a kidney.
The Wi-Fi was pretty slow there, too.
They had Wi-Fi. They had a gerbil on a wheel, I'm sure.
Well, it was the kind where you have to renew it every day. It's not free. You have to pay every day for it. So, and then you kind of are budgeting. Like, if I can space it so that when I'm out, I'm not, I finished the one that I paid for, and then when I get back, I can pay for the next one, and I don't have to pay for those 8 hours that I'm not in the room.
Oh. Man, I hate living on a budget. My least favorite.
Yeah. So, how's the pandemic doing for you? Has it had any effect on you in terms of work?
Well, sure. Well, when it first happened, I thought, oh boy, a global pandemic. I'll get so much done.
Yeah.
What you don't really account for is the crushing depression that comes with a distrust of your leadership.
Mm-hmm.
God, I don't want to talk politics, but it's been a depressing space to be in. So on one hand, you've got all the time in the world to create and write sonnets. I could have probably picked up the guitar, and there are sort of fits and phases. So you may have like a couple of days where you're getting a lot of stuff done and you think everything's great, and if I just make art, I can make the world better, and that's my corner of the world, and that's whenever we come out of this, we poke our heads at, we will need art, we will need new comic books, we'll need material. And then on the other hand, you think, well, I don't know, the human race is kind of done. Why bother? Like, crack a beer and throw a movie on and just wait for it all to start burning. So I'm not the most optimistic person, but I'm moody. I'm a creative person. It takes you up and down. So we did. I did the fulfillment phase of our Nocturnal Commissions Kickstarter during the pandemic, and that was interesting. And I got to see firsthand how overburdened the postal system is here, because I was delivering, totes and totes and totes of books and packages to the warehouse, and they literally said, "Don't bring us books, don't bring us things right now." I was like, I have to. I made this commitment before the pandemic. I wouldn't have planned a Kickstarter during the pandemic. In fact, I had a Kickstarter planned for June that I've just held off on because I was waiting for a good time, and there doesn't seem to be a good time, Tim.
Yeah, not in 2020.
I did partner with a friend of mine. Her name is Adrienne Ambrose, and she's a novelist. And she was like, "You have this time. You have a brain. Let's write a book together. Let's write some books together." So we brainstormed some ideas, and she took one and wrote a draft, and I took one and I wrote a draft. But my draft was like way too long. was supposed to be 4,000 words, and I turned in 8,000. And the idea was that we would each edit each other's pieces. So we would brainstorm the ideas together, and then we would edit, each take a writing pass and then edit. So we ended up writing, instead of like a little short chapter book, we ended up writing a full novel. And that was like a really productive week where I thought like, wow, this is great. This is all coming together. I've got my mojo back, and then turned in my draft, and then paralysis of indecision. So you write a book, write a bunch of books, write a bunch of graphic novels, and then it's time to start the next one, and you forgot how you did the other ones. It's like someone else did it, and you feel like a fraud. So to answer your question, up and down, it's been an emotional journey. This everything, not just the pandemic, but the social unrest, and now we're heading into the politics, and just the general social schism that we find ourselves in is disheartening, Tim. Wherever you may land on the political spectrum, you would think that we could problem solve a little bit better.
Yeah. Now, you don't work for the Golden State Warriors anymore, do you? I think when I talked to you in 20...
Oh, they smartened up and let me go.
Yeah, when I talked to you in 2018, I think you were not there anymore.
I think I was probably closer to the end. It was a contract position where I did creative consulting, and I weighed in on some really fun, cool projects. And it's the type of job I would have paid to have, because I was in the room with people much smarter than myself, which doesn't sound like enough of a compliment, but I got to hear and just work alongside some really, really smart, passionate people. So that was super helpful for me in my career and just what I do. I feel like it really altered how I approach projects now.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned before we started recording, I had forgotten about your 2018 appearance on the podcast talking about the 20th anniversary of Jane's World, and I listened to the 2017 appearance when I was in Portland, and you were talking about writing some video games, although you didn't go into it much at the time.
I wrote a game called... Yeah. I wrote a few games. What was the first one called? Oh, man. I forget.
I guess I waited too long to ask you.
You did. I wrote a game for Maximum Games, and it was about ogres. It was a lot of fun. It was a platform game. God, I can't remember what it was called. I'd have to look at my website. Remember I told you I have a terrible memory? So, like, you work on a project, and it means everything to you, and then you walk away, and you forget everything about it, because you just start the next thing.
What's your website? I'll look it up here.
It's jason-mcnamara.com. As soon as I look, I'm going to look, too, and see what this guy's been up to. He's always up to something. He needs to update the website, I can tell you that.
Script writing class.
Yeah,
you're teaching also, right?
Yeah, I teach an adult class over the summer, and then the undergraduate class starts next month. And I also have thesis kids that I mentee thesis kids, and get their projects ready for thesis review. Looks like I can't even access my own site.
Well, I'm not finding any heading for games here. I see a bunch of other stuff, but
look at my CV.
Okay.
My curriculum vitae.
Well, let's see. Graphic novel.
Extinction. I wrote Extinction.
Okay.
Yes, that's what it was.
Extinction,
I
okay.
worked with Maximum Games, and I wrote the main storyline for Extinction, and that was super fun. I don't think they're going to do a sequel to it, but being in that room and going through that process was great. And then what did I do? I consulted on another game for Maximum Games, and about halfway through, they decided to go in a different direction. That's not unusual. I also was working on a Telltale game that never came out because they went under.
Oh, so wow!
The game got canceled. But still, I worked on that, and the way they approach game writing is actually really, really interesting. And I use some of those examples in my script writing course.
Well, how do you go about writing a game? It's hard for me to imagine because I don't really do games anymore.
Well, it depends on the scope of the game and how big the game is. Right now, I'm personally playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and that has 500,000 lines of dialogue, so there would be many, many, many writers involved in that. And any game is going to have multiple voices and opinions and producers and objectives that it needs to clear. So it depends how far along they bring the writer in. They may have assets, they may have a story world, but not a arc for the characters, a satisfying arc or a satisfying ending. So what is the emotional journey? But with Extinction, I was already handed the characters, I was handed the world, and I was tasked to create the interpersonal relationships, the interpersonal conflicts, and a history of the world, and a history of the characters, and a twist. We needed a big twist. And it was somewhat challenging because there was sort of two timelines. There was the current timeline, and then there was the past timeline. And they were working in parallel, and then they had to intersect, and the game had multiple endings. So you had to really work it backwards and forwards. And it had animated sequences, and the writing for that is very, very different because animation is expensive. So, in a cutscene in a game when they have like an animation sequence, so the animation costs so much more than everything else. So we probably must have done 30 drafts of each of those animated sequences and read them out loud and timed them, because once you send it to the animators, you don't get to redo it. It has to be perfect, and it has to fit 45 seconds and has to accomplish X, Y, and Z. So
why is that part so expensive?
Than just regular digital gameplay. I mean, you can play a game and be in the same world or place. Once you create the graphics and create the environments, you can play in those environments all day long. I'm playing Red Dead Redemption, and I'm not leaving Chapter 2. I've been in Chapter 2 for like a month. And I'm just running around catching things and getting all my little medallions and buying stuff from the trapper. Once the world is built, it's built. But animation sequences, because it's a totally different team, and it's just more expensive. Like, people have to animate it. You have to have voice actors. There's music.
I see.
So how all those things work together, I was completely clueless about until I worked on Extinction. So that was fun. But, the phone isn't ringing for video games right now. None of the games I worked on were a huge success, and 2 of the 3 didn't come out. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's kind of frustrating.
It is. I worked on a project for Lucasfilm, a Star Wars project, probably like 10 years ago. I came in and I consulted on a digital comic project that was really ambitious, and eventually they canned it. They canceled it because of the budget. So it's tough. So I was in the room, I was working on things, it didn't happen. I had been in the Marvel offices many years ago, consulting on a project that was building up steam, and then that got canceled. That never happened. Basically, what I'm saying is, if you hire me to work on a project, it's gonna get canceled. Somebody somewhere will pull the plug on it. So I have a resume of all these near misses, and pictures of me and Marvel Studios didn't happen. Pictures of me at Lucasfilm didn't happen.
Oh, I'm sorry. This podcast episode's being canceled.
Your show just got canceled. I could see them repossessing your apartment in the video. Yeah, so a lot of swings and misses, Tim. As any creative career, as my creative career goes.
So you sent me the first issue of a series you're working on with Greg Hinkle called Nocturnal Commissions. So tell us about that.
Nocturnal Commissions is about a vampire, a werewolf, and a zombie that open up a detective agency. And then things get weird. Sort of like an odd couple pairing. I wanted to do a comic book about sort of the outcasts of outcasts. So the vampire has he's an albino, so he's got sort of different attributes than other vampires. The werewolf has his own unique story why he's not beloved by other werewolves, and the zombie is sort of the thing that brings them together. He's a zombie that can control the recently deceased. So even among these different sort of communities that are outcasts among themselves, these 3 don't have a home anywhere else, and they sort of come together to do good for as long as they think that will last, and they don't think that will last long.
I was interested in the fact, I think this is maybe one of the funniest books that I've seen from you, and I was kind of glad to see that because I know how funny you can be in conversation, but some of the books you put out have been pretty dark, and this has darkness to it also, but it's also kind of light in a way. It's kind of humorous. So, I was kind of see two different sides of Jason in one book.
There are many Jasons. I can't get rid of that guy. Different things appeal to you at different times, and different books need to accomplish different things. But that's also your collaborators. Who you're working with will bring out different aspects in you. I don't dictate scripts. I'm not really. I have a loose hold on scripts and story, so that the collaborators have room to shape them. And Greg always brings out like a whimsical side of me. Greg is not a dark guy. Greg Hinkle, the illustrator, my co-creator, my friend. He is a warm, loving, sweet guy. And we had talked about what are we going to do. The Rattler was a very dark book, and neither one of us really want to spend two years in that kind of space again. So we had done a convention together, and we just threw ideas back and forth. And he's like, dude, I want to do a fun monster book, like a fun horror book that sort of toes the line. And I was like, I know that line because I live that line. Like, let's do something that's like, people always tell me I'm dark but funny. I'm like, let's just do what we're really, really good at. Big splashy monsters with a dark sense of humor that no one else would ever let us do. And it's not because it's outrageous but because it's violent. I don't think it's any of those things. I don't think it's especially violent, even though bad things are happening. I don't think it's especially racy. There's no curse words in it. I mean, it's probably PG in some ways. I heard from a friend of mine, her 10-year-old kid loved it. And I think any of the humor that is, adult is going to fly over the head of a kid. One of our characters has a book called Battling Toxic Monstrosity. No kid's going to understand what that means. We understand what that means. And it was fun, and we just liked it. It has a romp. It feels like it's almost like a modern Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and it seemed to me Greg's work looked better than ever in this one. And then the colors from Paul Little, say his name correctly. Looking at the combination of what they did, I felt almost like I was looking at animation stills.
Yeah, it's really bright. So Paul did color flats, actually. He helped us sort of speed up the production of the book. But the final colors are also Greg.
Okay.
So it's really Greg's baby. He really put a lot of work into that script and made it. He had a really strong idea how it should look and how it should feel. And the tone is always really important to me. When you open a book and you look at the art, like how do you feel? How are you supposed to feel? Because the fewer words I can put into a script, the better. I always want the art and the colors to dictate the mood and inform like how you should feel. And I think the color palette in that book tells you this is not a dark book. You should not be scared. We're not trying to scare you. We want to slyly wink at you and pull you in on the joke. Like the original Ghostbusters. Not really scary.
No.
But there are different personalities in that you can explore. So like the werewolf, how the werewolf and the vampire interact, how they interact with the zombie. It should be relatable to people that have to have coworkers. And there's always a give and take and a schism and interpersonal conflict with coworkers, but you get along for the common good. And I wanted to do that, but use monsters as that metaphor.
And so you kickstarted this.
Oh yeah.
So how did I take it you made your goal?
We are rich as shit. I'm Skyping from my yacht.
And I see the first issue is available on Comixology.
Yes. So we kickstarted it. Kickstarter is my publisher. Probably a few years ago, I made the decision that my biggest heartache, my biggest hurdle in comics is always getting a publisher's attention. I am just not a great networker, Tim. It's just not something I take seriously. I can't take myself seriously. If you've ever seen me at a convention, I'm probably not behind my table because I can't sit behind a table and take myself seriously or talk about myself longer than it will take to do this podcast. I just I chafe at that aspect of comics. So I had to ask myself, what am I really good at? I'm good at writing. I love collaboration. I love working with people and seeing what two people can create from nothing. That is like the heroin high that I'm chasing. 2 years ago, Greg and I didn't have a book. Then we had an idea, and then we shaped it and pruned it and created the structure to make a book. I know how to kickstart. It's not rocket science. I'm not especially bright, But if you tell people you're going to do something, you just do it. That's the secret to Kickstarter. Do what you say you're going to do. And all the materials that you need to succeed are out there. Do you need to find a publisher, a printer? There are thousands of printers that will take your money. They cannot wait to take your money. There's all these vendors are set up to take your money. There's someone out there. It's not hard. You have to send a couple of emails. You have to make a budget, and anyone can succeed at Kickstarter if I can. But I think of Kickstarter less as a funding mechanism and more of a marketing platform. Like we were sort of spreading the gospel of this book. The book was done. I needed money to print it and to ship it to you, but I didn't need money to create it. Greg and I did that on weekends for over a year. In between jobs, he'd knock out 2 pages here, 2 pages there. It was a passion project for us. And when it was completely done and foolproof, then we launched it. And at that point, it's closer to a pre-order, like that you would normally do through Diamonds. Does this look cool? Awesome. In 2 months, it'll arrive at your house. Instead of going to the store, we're just going to mail it to you. Although we did have retailers support the campaign, and I was stoked to send them books when no one else had books. DC wasn't making books. Marvel wasn't making books. So I was able to sell them books and resell them books and keep sending them books.
Wow.
Their clients, because there was no other material at the time. So in that way, the timing was great. The bad timing is I can't go to conventions and celebrate this book, which is what I was really excited about, introducing this book to the comic book community. And the community is at the convention. It's not in my basement office.
No. So, how long does it take to make an issue? I mean, is it going to be another year before we see number 2, or?
Well, economics play a factor. Greg is in demand, and Greg cannot handle multiple projects. He is not that fast. He's not slow, but he can't do. He can't take on too much. So he is finishing up a project right now. I can't say what it is. And then we're going to look at his schedule, because his next project got canceled during the corona. And ideally, we would like to find a publisher for Nocturnal Commissions that could guarantee him a page rate. He just had a baby, so he can't just, hope that Kickstarter pays him money later on. We have to be a little bit more strategic with him and his time. He wants to continue this, and we're trying to find a way to do that. And that might be we do a couple of 10-page shorts. The second issue is completely written, but for him to start a 24-page comic, we don't know. It could be a year. If I'm being honest, it could be a year. If I'm being honest, it could start next week. We just don't know. The coronavirus issue has thrown a lot of stuff in the air as far as plans that I had, plans that Greg had, and he just had a newborn, which complicates everything in this system. So I'm really lucky that we got the book out at all. And we did have to pivot and a little bit, but my printer stayed open, post office stayed open, all my vendors stayed open, and yeah, we successfully kickstarted it. Ideally, I would like to hand it off to somebody else, because Greg needs that stability. But we don't get it. I'm sure I could launch a Kickstarter tomorrow to fund the second one. It would just make me nervous to take money for something that isn't finished yet. So it's the catch-22. Kickstarter is not meant to. It's not a pre-order system, but the best way to do it is to finish the book first and then go to Kickstarter. Kickstarter will tell you that as a funding platform. I disagree. I think it's a marketing platform.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've certainly seen. I once contributed to a project that they needed the funding to make it. It was going to be a film, and it seemed as if they made most of the film, and then they had a falling out with the subject of the film, and the whole thing just collapsed, and the film never came out, and never got to see it. So that's the problem with taking the money before you've made it.
But Kickstarter is meant to be an entrepreneurial platform. And sometimes with anything, you're taking a risk, right? You're rolling the dice. It's not the same as ordering something off of Amazon. You are making something happen. And you're also dealing with people that don't have the infrastructure to do large-scale productions. I think with comic books, the amount of money needed and the amount of people needed is much smaller. But yeah, for sure, we could fund Nocturnal Commissions issue 2, and Greg and I could decide, hey, you know what? You like prog rock and I like punk rock. We just can't be friends. And then if I get, somebody off the street to draw Nocturnal Commissions, well, that's not what you wanted. You wanted Greg Hinkle. You didn't want the Jason McNamara Nocturnal Commissions. You wanted the two of us together. So yeah, there is an element of risk with Kickstarter always. It's not foolproof. I try and make it foolproof because I think anytime somebody asks where is the book or where is the X, you have failed at engaging your audience. Now your audience is worried about you. You should always be exceeding their expectations. Whether it's a book you're doing through Image or Diamond or wherever, you should always give them more than they think they're getting. Because they deserve it, because they're putting money in your pocket, because they're putting the roof over your head. I take that very, very seriously. So even how many years have I been doing this? 17 years, 18 years? I don't know. But I take my audience really, really, I do not take them for granted. It's not a big audience, but I love them. And I just feel like that's a relationship that you should always prioritize and treat really, really, really well. Because in 18 more years, we could be talking about, Paige will be doing Jane's World for 50 years. We'll be talking about the 50th anniversary of Jane's World.
Coming up, how is the pandemic going to affect the writing of fiction? Do audiences want the pandemic to be part of the story or as far away from the story as possible? And Jason shares some of the story guidelines he teaches in his writing class. Coming up after this. Help us reach our goal to unlock a new podcast about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist, The Law of Equivalent Exchange. It's a chapter-by-chapter reading of the manga with commentary on the translation, including the sound effects, and on how creator Hiromu Arakawa masterfully put together the story of Edward and Alphonse Elric. Patrick and I have already started recording the show, and we can't wait for you to hear it. If you're a fan of Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga of the 21st century, pledge now at patreon.com/deconcomics to hear The Law of Equivalent Exchange.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
Something I've been kind of thinking about off and on the past few months. I wanted to see what you think about this. So, back in March, we didn't realize maybe, or most of us, it hadn't quite occurred to us how much the pandemic was going to affect everything and for how long it was going to affect things. And so how should people who are writing fiction deal with that in their work? I mean, because I'm thinking on the one hand, the readers or viewers probably don't necessarily want to see the virus in all of their fiction, but at the same time, anything without the effects of the virus in it sort of feels a little outdated in some ways.
Right. So if you're doing a book today and it was about, some love story or something, you could adapt that as part of your background element, or it's taking place. I mean, the best stories occur during a time and a place. But on the other hand, we are tired of this. This is not entertaining to us. And I equated a lot with 9/11. Because I had the same feeling lately that I've had immediately after 9/11. We were all waiting for the next thing. We were all our hair was up, we were on alert, and we were just filled with this dread that the worst hasn't happened yet, or something else could happen. And there was the anthrax scare, and we all had realized the world had changed. And any of the 9/11 material that came out after that, I avoided. I don't want 9/11 material. I lived through it. I made an opinion about it. I'm a New Yorker. Like, I don't want to relive that. I don't want it in entertainment. I didn't read Ex Machina, the comic book.
Yeah, Brian
Sure
K. Vaughan book. I remember it.
He's a great writer, but I just don't want to go near that because it's too real for me. And it's too raw, even still 20 years later. So, but to your point, 9/11 was an event. I don't know that this is going away, Tim. So
yeah,
we just have to have love stories and adventures and all these things occurring in this atmosphere. I think the best thing to do is to write around it or write it as an allegory. I think all entertainment was shaped by 9/11, but most of it didn't directly address it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read between the lines, it was there. Mm-hmm. You know, like even in that first Spider-Man movie, remember? All the New Yorkers on the bridge?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was a 9/11 moment that didn't say, hey, remember 9/11.
Right. Yeah, I just was watching. I finally watched it for the first time recently for our Patreon movie review show, and I could see just watching it. Yeah. Well, actually, I think Wikipedia said that was added after 9/11. It wasn't in the original script that was written before then, but they added it because of that.
Well, the original trailer, if you remember, for that first Spider-Man movie, had the World Trade Center in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might have been a reaction to that. But it was all over. A lot of movies had that 9/11 metaphor for it going on. And I think that's the best thing to do now is to talk about the distancing, right around it without talking about the politics, which is so hard to do because everything is politicized.
Yeah.
But if you are not leaving the house, if you are experiencing loneliness, like these are things that are universal to all of us right now. Like we all have to work with this hanging over our heads, and we're shuffling through this semblance of a normal existence, but things are not normal. Things are bug nuts. So how do you make art in this time? Do I have a graphic novel for you? So a few years ago, I wrote a book called Ghost Band, and the artist has turned in quite a bit of the pages, and we are going to kickstart it. And stop me if you've heard this. It's about a global pandemic, and people have to make art during this time. So there's one day left on the planet, and a group of people in San Francisco decide to start a band. And the last act of humanity will be a piece of art before they too are wiped out into the night. This was a graphic. I wrote it years ago, but I'll be kickstarting it now. And do people really want the rock and roll pandemic book? I don't know, but they're about to get it.
Yeah, we'll find out.
It's called Bad Timing.
What was the title of the book?
Ghost Band.
Ghost Band. I see. Okay.
Ghost Band. Yeah, and I can, in the chat, I will send you, if I have it, I will send you a link to the pre-page, the pre-launch page. Kickstarter has these pre-launch pages now.
Okay.
So you can take a look at it beforehand.
Okay. Yeah. Can I link to that in the show notes?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think it might depend. How people they might just have to, it might depend on the project. Yeah, if you might just set it in the past, and if you got a good reason to set it in the past, then you don't have to worry about the pandemic. But yeah, it is kind of hard to decide whether to include it or not.
You're right around it. You're right, and it's a story that happens to occur, and it's in the background. It's not the main thing. You don't have a scientist running around trying to cure it because it's negatively affecting all of our lives. We're not ready to satirize it. We're not ready for the fictional solution to it. You're right around it.
It might there might be more like after there's a vaccine and things get better, which someday will hopefully happen. Then maybe you might see more fiction that's really about the pandemic.
I appreciate your optimism, too.
Or maybe not. Maybe we'll just maybe like 20 years after the pandemic, it'll be enough time, and
you just refer to it as the thing. You refer to it as the event that changed all of our lives, and then you tell your story, and then it's in the background, and it's never changing.
But, as I think about it, I think this might be why, practically nobody was aware of the 1918 pandemic, those of us who weren't around for it, because maybe nobody wanted to talk about it after it was over, and they didn't put it in their movies, what movies there were. I mean, that was a long time ago, but maybe the same thing will happen this time, and none of the lessons will be passed on for the next time.
Well, 1918, you think of so much had happened in the years after 1918, including like the First World War. Well,
it was 1918 was about the time it was ending, right? It was during the war. Yeah.
So then the Industrial Revolution. So much. The 19th century was just event after event after event after event. The plague's problem was it happened too early.
Yeah, if it happened during World War II, maybe it would have been better remembered.
Yeah, it's all about timing. Come on, plagues. It's all about that time.
Schedule your plagues,
So we talk about things going back to normal, and the more we say that, the more insincere it sounds. Mm-hmm. And this might just be our new normal. When I was teaching in the spring, my class shifted to an online platform, and the students struggled with that because they were used to meeting in a space with me in person. Mm-hmm. So the engagement level was harder to reach them in the undergraduate class. Also, the class is really large. 22 kids in a Zoom call is too many. Mm-hmm. But with my summer classes, what I've noticed is the expectation was we're signing up for an online class. Like, this is what we're doing now. The engagement level is 100% because they signed up for an online class. Mm-hmm. So I think if our expectation is we're doing this digitally from now on, people will adapt. None of my students talk about the pandemic anymore. All we do is talk about stories and comic books. Mm-hmm. Because the expectation is this is a relief. This is an outlet and a time for us to make stuff. And it's true. It is. I am struggling with my own optimism in this time, if I could be frank. But other people are not. And other people are making great work right now. And how we share that work is going to change. Like, I love comic book stores. To me, they are church. Like, I hope they survive. Mm-hmm. But maybe the floppy model does not survive. Maybe we go floppies or digital, and the collections go to bookstores. Mm-hmm. Like, do I want to leave the house every Wednesday? Not really. To be frank, I don't. Like, Batman can beat a lot of things, but Batman cannot beat the pandemic. So I think, if anything, this is going to shift a lot. We're going to have a real painful growth, real period of adjustment, a painful period of adjustment as we meet the world. But entertainment's not going away, but how we make it and how we distribute it is going to. How we absorb, how we make it. All these things will change. You won't see crowd scenes. The idea of an extra is gone. Like, if you're an extra in Hollywood, I'm sorry, you're never working again.
Yeah.
They can just generate someone to stand in the background.
Yeah, well, now every time if I watch something, old where there are like 20, 30, 40 people in a room or 100 people in a room, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a super spreader event. I just can't not think about it anymore. I
was, in October, I went and saw the Misfits at Madison Square Garden. And I had floor tickets. I was down there in the mosh pit right up front. I touched Danzig's little hand at one point. And I thought, that will never happen again. Like, so, but hey, I'm an older guy. I had my fun. If I spend the rest of my life broadcasting from my basement, no harm, no foul. My heart weeps for the 20-year-olds who never got to go to a concert and be in a mosh pit. There's a whole generation missing out on that connectivity. At my advanced decrepitude, it's no great loss.
So, tell us more about your class. What are you teaching, and how is that going?
So, what's interesting is I was approached to throw my hat in the ring for a comic writing class. The liberal arts college here, Pacific Northwest College of Art, they were looking for someone to teach comic book writing. And I talked to the department head, and we got along well, and I had some ideas, and I was hired, and I thought, oh no, how do I explain what I do? At that point, I'd probably written 12 or 15 graphic novels, but I never stopped to think about how they all got made. So I retraced all the steps, sort of looked at a book on the shelf and said, Jason, how did you do this? And I walked it back. And I looked at another thing, like, how did we do this? Because I have a terrible memory, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, okay, it all starts with a germ of an idea, and it ends with a book on the shelf. So if it's a 16-week class, what are the 16 steps in between those? So we start with the germ of an idea. Do you have an idea? And then we go around the room and we pitch each other ideas. And then we workshop those ideas until they become 3 sentences. And we really work on those 3 sentences. They have to be a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Mm.
Every story has those 3 pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't do it in 3 sentences, like 10,000 more sentences are not going to help you.
Mm.
Because if you have to pitch it to a consumer or an editor, 3 sentences is the max you're ever going to get. If you're ever looking at Netflix and the description of stuff, it's 1 sentence. They distill it even more because people don't like to read. They especially don't like to read when they're looking at a screen.
Mm.
But so can you pitch it? Can you pitch it to a consumer? It doesn't matter how good your book is if nobody wants to read it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to sell it. So the 3 sentences, we spent a few weeks on that, and then we turn those sentences into paragraphs. And then you have an outline. If you turn each of those sentences into a paragraph, you got an outline. Awesome. Then we're going to do a beat sheet. And a beat sheet is, you have to guesstimate how many pages your project is. So Nocturnal Commissions, we said, okay, this is going to be 24 pages. That's how much content I think we have. That's what I think we have time for Greg to illustrate in his schedule. So we took our outline, and then we said, okay, we have X amount of pages. How many pages is this scene? How many pages is this scene? So then you have a plan for every page. Because when you work in comic books, the canvas is a page. The page is your canvas.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't add an extra page to Batman if you have a really good story that month. Because once you add a page to a book, if you add 4 pages to 50,000 comics, now that's actually 20,000 pages that have to be shipped. And someone has to illustrate them. It goes on and on and on. So you usually have a locked-in page count.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what happens on every page. And then you can look at your story at a really high level. And you can see where it lags. And you can see where the denouement happens too soon. So the first time we did a beat sheet for Nocturnal Commissions, and that is a plan, what happens on every page, we realized the story was ending too soon. And that it just petered out. And then you had a bunch of guys standing around having a conversation at the end, which is not what you want. So then we adjusted the beat sheet. And this is a visual medium, so we don't worry about dialogue. Look at the high level. Is it visually interesting? Is it visually moving? Is the pacing there? And this is what Jeff Johns also does when he writes comic books. I talked to him about this at the Isotope once. He does the same thing. He showed me his notebook. When he writes a comic book, he takes DC Comics are 20 pages. He has a plan for what happens on every page, and that's where you start with the script. And then once you're writing the script, we move into that aspect. My advice is write a script without any dialogue and ask yourself this. Is it visually interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Are you telling this story visually? Can you take out all the dumb words that I write and still follow this story? If not, then it's not a visual medium. Then it's a radio play. It's a podcast. It's a novel. It's not a comic book. So I have, and students will guess and they'll say, well, I think this is 7 pages. I'm like, okay, but you can't have a comic book that opens with 7 pages of dialogue at a cafe. For one, cafes are mundane because we all go there. There's nothing special about a cafe unless it's on Mars. So let's get rid of that. Let's have that dialogue, but have it happen over other visual information that you're trying to get across. The other thing I really work with them on is the characters. Are there conflicts between the characters in a panel? That is, what is their body language towards one another? What is their body language towards their environment? What, visual, how are you telling the story visual? That is, for example, in The Rattler, my graphic novel with Greg Hinkle, we put the perspective in places the human eye isn't normally situated. Like the back of a closet, extreme low angles looking up through a keyhole. And we wanted to create a sense of dread and uncomfortableness, and that worked because your eye isn't normally in those places.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did a typical medium shot of just two people looking at each other, it's not asking anything of the viewer because they see that perspective all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But now if you do an overhead shot looking down, you get an idea of like what people are in relation to their environment. If you're doing a low angle looking up, you're giving power to that subject. If you do a high angle looking down, you're telling us, the reader, that subject has less power in relation to the problems they're facing. These are all little things that you can do to help tell a story without dialogue. So we work on that. And then we do dialogue last. And dialogue has a very specific purpose in comic books. It's for characterization and exposition. That is, we are going to do X, Y, and Z. Don't forget, this is what we're doing right now. Also, this is who I am, and these are the conflicts I'm having with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal opinion is less is more with dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And an example that would refute that, Brian Michael Bendis has a career doing the exact opposite, but he does it really, really well.
That was the first person I thought of, too. Yeah, some of
Yeah.
his comics with dialogue balloons snaking all over the place.
But he does that better than anybody else. So if you do that, you may be doing a Brian Michael Bendis impersonation. For me personally, I feel less is more. I feel comic books should breathe and have an environment to them and have a tone. And that tone can be smothered with words. If you're telling people constantly how to feel, then you're not effectively telling a visual story. So that's my class in a nutshell. You just saved a bunch of money.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so, you've been on the show so many times, but we've never, looked at somebody else's comic and talked about it. You and I should review something together. We'll have to offline figure out what that might be, but...
Have you ever read My Favorite Thing is Monsters?
I think somebody else might have reviewed that on our podcast,
Okay.
Kumar and
It's
somebody.
It's a big book, and it's a really unusual book. In that it sort of defies every story note you would ever get. So it's an 800-page graphic novel. The graphic novel was so big they had to print it in 2 parts. They literally just could not print this book to size.
Wow.
And I don't know if Emile Ferris wrote a script or if she just started illustrating. But if I told you the plot of this book, you would say that will never work. And if I tell it to my kids, I'm like, does that sound like it would work? And they say, absolutely not. I'm like, but it does. It's like she wrote, Emile Ferris is like the exception to every rule that I will teach in my class. But I also teach the kids, like, this is a 3-act structure. This is the hero's journey. These are why all these things work. But I want you to know them, and if you want to throw them away, throw them away. But just know what you're throwing away. We also talk a lot about theme, the importance of theme, and how a theme can elevate a dodgy premise. And the example I always give is Jaws. And, of course, most of them have never seen Jaws, the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good. So we talk about that. Like, if I told you the theme of the story, like the plot of Jaws, what do you like? Does this sound good? It's about a rubber shark that runs around eating people off an island. Does that sound like a good movie? And everyone's like, no. And I'm like, okay, but I'm here to tell you it's a fantastic movie. And it's a fantastic movie because it has a really strong theme. And that when you're writing a project, you can check in with the theme sort of as your compass. So Jaws should be a shit movie. It should be a forgotten, awful movie from the 70s, but it's not. Because it has a really, really strong theme about conquering your fear. Sheriff Brody is throughout it confronted by fear until he confronts his fear, goes to sea, and then is no longer afraid of the water. And I get into the socioeconomics of New York in the 70s, and the personal, the local, the global. But stories are about conflicts, and like you talked about the coronavirus, like stories take place in a time and a place.
Mm-hmm.
So we will see fantastic works come out about the coronavirus. We just don't want to read them today.
Right.
I don't want them today. I am not ready for that because I am still telling people at the gym to put the mask over their goddamn nose. Put it over your nose hole.
Yeah.
Over the nose hole, buddy. And wipe down your equipment, you filthy beast. I'm so happy the gym reopened, and I know it's just a matter of time before it closes. It's just days.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm there doing everything I can think of.
By the way, I checked, Kumar and Emmett talked about my favorite thing is monsters in episode 613, so people can look that up if they haven't listened to it. That's been almost 2 years ago now.
Awesome. Well, find us something else, and I will gladly talk about it. But I will also say this. I am not critical. If I find a comic book that I don't think is working or isn't living up to its potential, I just put it down and I move on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to be super critical about anybody's work, because if you took the time and it meant something to you, like, I understand the value of that. So I'm not Captain Positivity. I'm not a hippie. I'm not going to make you listen to my Fish record collection. But if we could pick something that I could be positive about, then I would absolutely come on the show and do that with you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming on this time.
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. Jason McNamara is at jason-mcnamara.com. That and the link to his Ghost Band Kickstarter are in the show notes. Want to support this podcast? You can help us out by joining us on Patreon. Your monthly support can help to unlock more classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics and our new podcast about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics for more details. You can also review us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. Subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Increasing our number of subscribers helps a lot, and you'll get our episodes automatically every week. We also hope you'll share your favorite DCP episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles to a larger audience. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The next episode is coming up this Saturday, in which we look at Miskatonic High by Mike Shea and Ryan Mendoza. Then next week on Deconstructing Comics, an interview with one of our Critiquing Comics favorites, Chad Bilyeu, writer of the Chad in Amsterdam series. That's next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.